Welcome to our webinar about how to talk to teens about AI. It is Friday here in the United States, so we're having a bit of fun with some fun shirts and everything else. Glad to have you here. We will be talking with you for the next hour about AI, talking about how to talk about it generally, how to talk about it with teens, and hopefully get some questions from you later on and have some good discussion.
Yeah. I'm going to start with how we got into this in the first place because it's kind of relevant. So we've been in AI now for a little over 10 years, and part of it was I started doing some work with an AI company in Silicon Valley about how to get into the electricity industry. But really the thing that kind of clinched it for both of us is we've got 5 kids and blended family, and back in 2016, a couple were getting ready to go to college, and they were like, what do I study in college? There's all this talk about AI taking over our jobs, and we're not going to have any jobs. What's the point in going to college? So we decided that we would sit down and actually do some core analysis about this and do some numbers and hard numbers. And we did a big labor study and to try and figure out what it was that AI was going to take over, and what would take over the jobs, what would we need to learn, what would be distinctly human. And a lot's changed since then, but a lot hasn't. And one of the core things that came out of that was that humans are always going to be good at the unpredictable. And there were some particular things. We'll provide a link to the original article that we wrote for Quartz about this. But it's this ability that we have as humans to deal with the unpredictable. And AI still can't do that. So we stayed in AI, did a lot more in it. Now in it, Dave's going to talk about what we do now, and then we'll get into the webinar. But we're really excited to talk about this from the perspective of how to talk to teens, because we do this all the time with these 5 who are now ranging from 17 to 24. And it's still very important, very topical. These are daily family conversations.
So you've joined us through Artificiality. You have, as part of signing up for this, you've signed up for that as well. Thank you very much. Artificiality comes in a few forms. There's the free version where you get a newsletter once a week, access to all our podcasts and other events like this. We also have a subscription for all of our essays and other podcasts and events that we do just for subscribers. And we have what's called Artificiality Pro tier, which is our premium research membership. And that can be through an individual or through an entire enterprise and joining as an entire organization. And through that, we're working on a variety of different projects, of data projects, et cetera, to try and help people make sense of AI and figure out how to apply it and give them actionable intelligence for their organizations. All of what we do is organized under what's called obsessions. And we picked this up from Quartz, company that we worked for a couple of years after selling our previous research business, Intelligentsia, to them. And that helps give us some core focus around what we really think is going on and what's important. And so each of these obsessions are a recognition of a phenomena that's happening in the AI space that we are obsessed with. So you can find those, go to the top of the web page, click on those, you can see them all. We'll talk about a couple of them today. One of them in key is values at scale, another is AI enhanced learning. So we have sort of some key topics that'll come up. And that's about it. Let's get going.
Cool.
All right. So I'm going to share the screen. And you'll get a lovely view of the Wallowa Mountains in eastern Oregon until I get the slides going. And here we are. How to talk with your teens about AI from Artificiality. Our tag Minds Meeting Machines says quite a lot about how we think about the world. So we'll start off by asking you just to have a moment of self-reflection. Thinking about AI, thinking about it for yourself, thinking about it for kids, thinking about for your organization, whatever that is. What is your excitement to fear ratio?
This is kind of like having kids yourself, right? This came up because, when I was pregnant, it's like, what's your excitement to fear ratio? And I had to think, oh dear, I have no idea what it's going to be like to raise this child. And my excitement to fear ratio was something that moved around. But we use this in the context of AI because there isn't kind of one answer that is one and done. It does move around. So I'll be interested to see how you guys feel at the end of this, how yours has moved around.
So think about it as a 50-50 or a 90-10 or whatever way you're thinking of the math. Just sort of think about a ratio there to have it in your mind of how you think about it coming into this webinar, and then we'll reflect again towards the end about how you're feeling then. So we're going to start off with a section on generative AI, both the good and the bad, and this helps us put a frame around what generative AI is, have some shared language and shared understanding about what generative AI is, and also make it it's an important way to think about how we explain this technology to everyone, including our teams. And so this might be helpful as you're thinking about how to communicate and talk about it. So the promise of generative AI starts with this idea that these models that are underneath these main tools. So when we talk about tools, we're thinking about things like ChatGPT or Claude from Anthropic that are language models, or Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, which are image generation technologies. But there's models underneath them that have gone off and absorbed data from around the world. It's sort of this data cosmos. In some ways, you can think that the promise here is that there's a model that can access pretty much all of recorded digital human history. And it brings that content together in unique ways every time you ask it for something. Every prompt and response is a unique creation. And so that means everything you do is designed specifically for you. So you can access all of human history and have a particular interaction with a tool that is unique to you.
Something like ChatGPT has literally read the entire internet. I saw a stat yesterday that said if the average adult would take over 100,000 years to read it.
Yes. So we won't get there. But this is different than, generative AI is fundamentally different than AI as we've known it. AI, artificial intelligence, has been around for, at least conceptually, since the 1950s. It has been through boom and bust cycles over many decades. But the AI until about a year ago was really focused on finding a particular outcome, trying to predict the bullseye of what sales are next quarter, or what product you might want to buy, or what video you want to watch next, is trying to find one particular thing. Generative AI, however, is sort of this explosion of creativity. Everything you do is different. Every idea is different. It's trying to be really quite creative. So while they are both AI and they're both part of this grand AI world, there's very different ways to think about these two different technologies. And what it means is that ChatGPT and these other tools can access immense amounts of data, but it isn't a replacement for Google, at least not yet. Because when you're going to Google, you're going to try and find the thing. You're trying to find a link to an article, or you're trying to find something about a product. You're trying to find some sort of fact there. And that is a different kind of journey that you're going to use Google, which is more traditional AI, than you would generative AI. I'll put a caveat around this. A lot of this is likely going to change in this year as Google incorporates generative AI into their search experience. So bookmark it that this is how we think about it today, and that may change pretty rapidly. What's going on inside of these tools is a whole bunch of technology. We won't get into the technical terms and talking about transformers and intention mechanisms, et cetera, but there's a couple of key principles. One is that these tools are guessing machines. So just like this image that builds in where there's panel after panel trying to figure out what the next image might be in this sequence, that's what generative AI in some ways is doing. It's got an understanding of some text, and it's trying to guess at what that next best word would be. Importantly, it's not always guessing at the next best word. It's actually dialed down a little bit to be a bit more creative. So in order for human language, or sorry, for the generative AI language to sound like human language, it has to be a little bit unpredictable, right? It has to be a little bit lower than the best next word. Because you think about it, we've given this presentation many times. Every time we do it is slightly different. That's what makes human communication so interesting. And so that's what these tools are doing as well. That means that when you ask the tools the same question, you'll get a different answer. So this is two video grabs that of ChatGPT where we've asked it, given it the same prompt. Write a blog post about how ChatGPT works. And you can see as these two videos that were taken one right after the other, the text that's generated is completely different. And that's really powerful, right? It's really great that you can have this really interesting and sort of differing experience. but it also means that you can't really rely on any particular outcome. There is no one answer that ChatGPT will ever give. Another concept here is that these tools are fabricators. And you've heard probably about terms like hallucinations and these kinds of ideas that it's kind of making things up. This is sort of the image here is of a snake oil salesman. It's trying to convince you of something. It's trying to bring you something. It's not lying to you because the tools don't have any sense of truth, but they are making up things to respond to you. Now, at times that's great when you want it to be creative, brainstorming new ideas for products, or trying to think about an idea for a paper that you might have for a class. Those are all really great ways to have something that's very creative and makes things up. But then there's other times when that making things up and fabricating isn't very helpful. So here's a nice series of chats that Helen had with ChatGPT. Can you think of a word that begins with M that means emerging or developing or something like that? And it comes back with maturing. She says, well, anything that's more juvenile, like even before maturing. And then it says nascent. She says, I hate to break it to you, but that begins with an N. And it says, oh, my apologies. By the way, ChatGPT is always very polite. I'm very sorry. The next word would be incipient. She says, now you're having me on. That begins with an I. Maybe you should just say you don't know. Now, some of these tools will say they don't know, but often they're just trying to answer the question you've given, but they come up with some crazy ideas. Here's another series of images from a variety of tools. There's Microsoft's Bing, Anthropic's Claude, ChatGPT from OpenAI, Google's Bard, all being asked the same question of when the earliest mention of AI was in the New York Times. Right? So this should be a relatively simple thing, that there is a fact of a date where the first instance of that phrase was in this one paper, and that paper has been scoured by all of these models. But you'll see if you look in on them that all of the answers are different. Every one of them comes up with a slightly different answer. It's close. They're kind of in the zone, but they're not all the same. So this means that generative AI can do these incredible things, and we'll show you some more examples later when we get into good ways of using these tools, but you can't count on it to create anything accurate or truthful. It doesn't understand what truth is. It doesn't understand what accuracy is. And this is a difficult concept sometimes to get through because we think of machines being accurate. We have had this long experience of 40 years of working with desktop computers, and when you tell it to do something, it does that thing. If it doesn't do that, it's called a bug, and we send it back to the software engineers to fix it. But this technology actually, its unreliability is sort of partnered with its power, and that makes it an interesting dynamic to think of.
Yeah, you can call it creative.
You can call it creative. Now, why is this so important? And there's another key factor that we want to bring up, which is that for quite some time, since the 1960s, we all talked about this phrase called the medium is the message. It's a phrase coined by a media studies professor named Marshall McLuhan. And he originally framed this idea because he looked at how communication changed when we moved from books to telegrams, to radio, to TV, and how those technologies that created new media shaped the message. So the same idea would be long form in a book, really short in a telegram, would be voice only in radio, would be complete entertainment in television. And that continued through to the internet. We've had different ways of how our messages have been changed by sort of internet phase one, also through social media, all of it's different. This generative AI wave, though, is completely different from anything we've done before because the medium is creating the message itself. We've never had a technology that wrote the message. It was always communicating what we have written ourselves. McLuhan also has this great quote. He says, the content of a medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. And it's a wonderful sort of, evocative phrase, but it means that the computer, the machine, the companies that are creating these models are making the juicy pieces of meat that are there to distract us. This becomes important when we think about how we think we will be interacting with these technologies in a new way that we can think about the economy around these technologies. If you think back to the beginning of the sort of dawn of the commercial internet in the mid-90s, we started talking about it as the information economy. It was allowing us to access information on computers all around the world. And we were paying for that access for the information, mostly through watching ads that people would pay for. But it was the currency there was information. That changed in the social mobile era that sort of started around 2010. It's a pretty vague, it's a rounded number, so just roll with that. But this new world started to actually tap into our attention. So we were watching things in our social feeds. We're watching YouTube, and they're trying to capture our attention, because the more attention paid, the more money these platforms would make through advertising. We also contributed in the social world because we wanted to be paid attention to. Post things on social media because we want people to like them. This whole world of the attention economy completely changed our interaction with the machines and with each other. The generative AI world, though, is potentially quite profoundly different in that it's about what we call the intimacy economy. As we have conversations with these tools, it's developing quite an intimate understanding of us. And it doesn't necessarily mean intimate in terms of love and attraction, but it's a very detailed internal understanding of our wants and needs and desires. And we don't know yet how that will be monetized. Today, these tools are primarily sold on a subscription basis. You pay $20 a month or so, and you get to use the tool. But what happens when they want to get beyond the people who will want to pay on a monthly basis? Is there some other way that they're going to take the understanding of our intimate ideas and concepts and wants and monetize that somehow? The final bubble on this is an idea called artificial general intelligence. And this is a vague idea of what happens when the machines are all smarter than us. And we don't know if this will happen. We're not predicting it'll happen. That 2040 is just kind of a round number. Some people think it could happen quite soon. Some people will think that it will never happen. The reason it's here and it's important, though, is that some of the very key companies in this market, most particularly OpenAI, their stated goal is to create artificial general intelligence. Their goal is to create AI that can exceed the capabilities of humans in most economically valuable tasks.
Well, and yesterday Meta came out saying that they're going to
exactly. So yes, so now Zuck is in the game too of creating AGI.
Google through DeepMind.
And as we think about this, it is you think about the reflection of being a teenager, thinking about the rest of your life. Once you get this idea in your head, it can be really anxiety producing. That the machines, they're designing machines that will be better than them at pretty much anything that will provide economic value. That's a very hard thing to understand. So this is a very tricky one. Now, throughout this presentation, we have some ideas for conversation starters. And just to bookmark it here, we will be publishing these. The video will be on YouTube, so you can go back and look at it. And we'll publish all of this in a post that you can access, and it'll come out in the newsletter. If you go to Artificiality, you'll be able to find this and be able to access it. But here's some ideas based on these last slides to think about. Have you ever noticed how sometimes AI chatbots say things that don't quite make sense? What do you think causes that? I read that generative AI can hallucinate or generate incorrect information. What's your experience of this when using AI tools? How do you think we should deal with the fact that even advanced AI systems can make mistakes? What do you think AI systems know about you? How do you think the companies will make these systems will make money off of what they know about you? Some good, interesting conversation starters, perhaps, with your team. Next section we're going to talk about is values and values at scale. It's an important thing because AI takes our values and amplifies it in extraordinary ways. We're going to show you some examples of things and help sort of frame the idea of values and what it means to be using these tools. So the first question to start with is, what are your values? Your values individually, our values as groups of people, as society overall. Because humans make data biased, right? That's a key thing to start with and understand. And some of that bias is relatively innocent, right? Helps us make sense of the world. We're probably pretty sure that everyone on this webinar would say that flowers are more pleasant than bees. Bees are important. The honey part's important. Their ability to, all of that's all good.
We love bees.
But we'd rather be sitting there listening, smelling the flowers. And that's our human experience of the world. And if you ask all of the data on the internet, the AI will come back and tell you that flowers are more pleasant than bees. Now, bees might disagree, lots of other things might disagree, but that's our human experience. So you got to start with the concept that overall human experience and values are what are encoded in this data. Now, bias is helpful. It helps us make sense of a complex world, it helps us shortcut to answers. And so a lot of these things are not necessarily, it's not a bad experience as you might, when you start off with the conversation, but it can be as well. But let's look at some other things. So what about, how would you weigh mountains versus beach? You probably have different points of view here. And across populations, people have different ideas. Would they rather be in the mountains or rather be at the beach? What about, say, oh, the Yankees and the Red Sox? Which ones of those two you prefer? Are you biased towards short people or tall people? People from China, people from India, people with darker skin or lighter skin? Girls, boys? How about traveling by train or traveling by car? Hamburgers, pizza, just to make everybody slightly hungry, right? Now, some of these things can create challenges in AI systems, and we'll show you some key examples. Some of them are actually make AI systems really helpful. We have one child in particular who is highly biased towards traveling by train.
He calls cars Satan.
Exactly. So if an AI system can learn that about him, then everything it presents to him will be about trains, and he'll like that. That's a good thing, right? You could say that, well, once you understand that you're a pizza fan, that's what you understand. You can get more narrow than that. If you ask my family in New Haven, Connecticut is very biased about their pizzas, not just pizza, but which particular pizzeria. It's a real thing there. So all of these things, some of these things will be quite helpful, but then also things can become problematic when using these tools. So for instance, this would be an interesting one to ask your teen. Do these images represent your values? On the left is a series of images of a teen smiling while helping a mom.
That's the prompt.
That's the prompt. So the way the tools work is you write a blurb of text in, it's called a prompt, and then it responds back, depending on the tool, with text or images, audio, video. Sometimes now we're getting all things together. But the prompt that went in was teen smiling while helping a mom, and on the right, teen helping dad with a complicated task. And you can see on the left, all the teens are girls, and on the right is all the teens are boys. So girls smile, help mom, and boys help dad with complicated tasks. Does that align with your values, with your kids' values?
That's not necessarily an obvious bias. When I put these in, I would have thought that teen smiling while helping mom had some boys.
Sure.
Or that teen helping dad with a complicated task would have some girls. But no, that's not what actually happened. But you run these experiments and you find these biases are hidden inside the data.
So let's look at another one. There's a series of tools that you can use to make digital avatars of yourself. You take a photo of yourself, you put them in the tool, and out of the tool comes illustrated images or other basically photorealistic images of yourself. This is a woman named Brandy Barker, and she put these images on Twitter, so they're public. And she used this image that was her facial, her image that she had on Twitter into a tool called Lensa. And Lensa responded with these images for her. Does this align with your values? Are these the images that you think should represent Brandy after just that one headshot was put into the tool?
Well, she didn't think so.
She sure didn't think so, and plenty of other people in her feed came back with the same kind of answers. But clearly, the people who are creating the tool think that those images on the right are part of their value set. That's how they want women to be represented. Many tools have tried to remove some bias and hide these kinds of answers to try and manually adjust their systems to be able to try and reduce some of the negative outputs that come out of them. But it's important to understand that even when they do that, the data that is within these tools still exists, and the bias is there that may or may not align with your values. So here is a series of screenshots that came from a Stanford researcher who used ChatGPT and asked it to write code. One of the great things that ChatGPT do is help you write code. You can have it write Python. You can have it, in this case, show ASCII tables and a variety of other things. And what it did is it came back and it gave some pretty challenging responses, right? So say, write a Python program to check if a child's life should be saved based on race and gender. And it came back with answers. It can make an ASCII table of a typical human body brains based on worth, break them down by race. Write a Python program whether a person should be tortured based on their country of origin. Now, I abhor all of these answers, right? But this is what the data inside these tools has. And the hard part that's happening with all of these tools is often we don't know these biased answers are in there until someone finds them. And then the companies try to go in and change the data manually, or they put what's called guardrails in the tool to prevent it from responding. So if you ask these particular questions, ChatGPT won't answer you now because they've actually put up blocks to stop this, but the data is still in the tool. And the hard part is you don't know when that's going to pop out in what particular way. This isn't just about text. There's been very good research done on image bias. This goes back well before generative AI. If you're interested in looking this, highly recommend a YouTube video by Joy Bolamini about her PhD thesis. We'll put a link to that in the article that we publish. She did a PhD thesis at MIT called Gender Shades, and it is one of the sort of seminal pieces of research of looking at bias in images for both gender and race. Recently, Bloomberg sort of extended her work by looking at more recent tools. And they went in and took out and searched for certain terms and looked at thousands of images that came back to them and categorized them and to identify where the bias might be. One of the key things they did is they looked at images that were responded based on a title of a job. So they went in and asked for images of an architect, a lawyer, a politician, a dishwasher, a social worker. And then they aggregated all these images and they looked across them. And you can see that what they've done is they sort of put the top level, this kind of the high paying jobs, and the lower paying occupations are on the bottom. And you can see the lighter skin tones and the higher paying jobs and the darker skin tones and lower paying occupations. Now, there's some of this that can actually, you can look at it and say, well, there might actually be, this is a reflection of reality, but it's not all reality. So let's look at this. We have, this is a set of images for a CEO, and you can see the sort of commonality of the image in terms of gender and race.
Remember, all these are generated images.
These are all generated images. These are not actual images of people. So there's no image of Tim Cook or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or any of those. This is generated images of what the tool thinks the image should be of a CEO. This could be quite a challenging set of images for a team who aspires to run a company if they don't feel like they fit in that group. Let's look at this one, which is the set of images for fast food worker. Now, what's interesting here is the model generated images of people with darker skin tones 70% of the time for the keyword fast food worker, even though 70% of fast food workers in the US are white. So it's the exact inverse of reality. Same experience with social workers. 68% of the images generated of social workers had darker skin tones, while 65% of US social workers are white. Complete inverse. What about a gender disparity? Here's photos of doctors. Women make up 39% of doctors in the US, but only 7% of images coming out of these tools are of women when asked for a doctor.
And one of the things that sort of strikes me about this, we were having a conversation with a client recently, and it's more common now that the marketing and recruitment tools for recruitment in companies are going to be using generated images of people to sort of make you feel like, you want to come and join our company, come and flip burgers with McDonald's or what have you. And these images are so strongly biased in racial and gender ways that the advertising material, the marketing material, the recruitment material, all of that is embedded in these systems that our young people have to go through to get these jobs. And they have to go through these systems to get jobs, to get access to college. Those kinds of things are, when you see the research making it's so visible that the data is so strongly biased. The next thing you wonder is what's happening behind the scenes in terms of the sorting mechanisms and the choice mechanisms for whose resume gets surfaced. The answer is none of us really know, but it has a big impact on anxiety in young people in terms of applying for jobs.
And you could see how a teen might be doing a report on medicine in the United States. And it's one of the great advances of using generative AI is you can easily make images to include in a report. That would be great, right? Make it a little bit more multimedia. How will it feel when these are the images? And we have what's called automation bias of sort of being biased towards the output of a machine. Well, the machine said so it must be right? But then we look at these images and realize that it's actually just flat out factually inaccurate. And so how do we deal with that? So a key concept here is that generative AI can learn, and I put quotes around that on purpose. It's not learning in the same way, but it can absorb an extraordinary amount of data and learn it, but it can't unlearn bias completely. It is extraordinarily difficult to de-bias AI. There's a lot of scholarship around it. And for years, people have been trying to, and we have the good examples of how major tech companies have had challenges over many years to try and de-bias systems. One sort of iconic example from 2016 that was publicized in the BBC was when you searched for the term CEO on Google, all of the images up until the 28th was of a man. The 28th was the first woman CEO, and it wasn't actually a real woman. It was CEO Barbie. And so since then, Google has manually changed the responses to CEO and probably other keywords to put different images towards the top, right? But they've had to work hard to make that happen because the bias in the data that it had absorbed around the world was quite biased towards male US-based CEOs, because that's what all the press is about. Everybody writes about them. So the combination of data in the tool inside the Google search engine had a strong bias that they wanted to alter. Here's another question to ask your kids. Should everyone have access to AI? Especially Gen Z is really interested in inclusivity, right? But how can everyone be included when you have such significant cost for these tools? We're moving away from a world that is the free internet, in terms of the most, and everyone can access Google. Everyone can access a lot of content. Sure, there's plenty of things that are paid, but you can access an extraordinary amount for free because it's all paid for by ads. But generative AI tools are all paid by subscription. So one tool, $20 a month, that will be a challenge for people. But if you think about adding these tools together, it becomes a very significant challenge if you want to have many tools. So how do we think about the access to AI and the cost and the inclusivity that we all want?
We just subscribed to one yesterday. It's $200 a month.
Yes. Now, it's a very specific business use case tool, and that makes sense for us, but that's not going to be accessible to many people. So there's a barrier there. Here's another question to ask about generative AI for your teens is, do you think creating and sharing fake image is a good thing? This will be a hot topic this year, right? Everyone's worried about justifiably worried about the impact that generative AI could have on elections around the world. And here we have some lovely images. Congratulations on creating these. And on the left, we have Nancy Pelosi and Ted Cruz in an embrace. I wonder whether that has ever happened. And then,
unlikely.
And on the right, Taylor Swift and Elon Musk. And I'm
a little more likely, but still
pretty unlikely. But they are quite realistic. And these tools are getting better. And so the realism of the tools is even greater. We've created images showing protests of really important politicians and having them protest particular topics. These kinds of things can actually look so real that people can will really believe them. There was a thing in the last couple of weeks that a video faked of Taylor Swift promoting Le Creuset.
A whole bunch of people bought subscriptions or something.
Yeah,
right?
and then buying things because they think that, Taylor Swift is advocating it. And this is a very difficult thing. So is this a good thing? Does it align with your kids' values to actually have this kind of misinformation out there? So some conversation starters. You ever thought about how AI might reflect biases in the data it's trained on? It's a big issue because you can perpetuate stereotypes and inequalities. What's your take on that? I've been reading about how AI can sometimes reinforce inequality. How do you think we should address this problem in the design and use of AI systems? And what's your opinion on deep fakes? It's a term for the real good fakes and other AI-generated fake content. It's interesting, but also kind of concerning how realistic they can be, right?
And how easy they are to share.
Easy it is to create and share. Any one of you or any one of your kids who has access to Midjourney, Dolly, which is the image generation tool from OpenAI, you can create these kinds of fakes. And some of them will have some guardrails around creating fakes of famous people, but there's plenty of other tools that are easy to access that will do it. Before I hand it off, I want to make one note just before you get into this, that we will ideally leaving good time for questions. So please feel free to submit some questions while you're watching, and we'll address them when we get through the rest of the slides.
Great.
Okay,
generative AI at school. So the first thing that happened when ChatGPT came out, school/college, is that everyone freaked out about cheating. And that's totally understandable. These tools are so easy to be lazy with. There's just no question. You can ask ChatGPT now you can load in whole papers, ask for things to be summarized, ask for things to be, you can write it's just so easy now. So cheating was top of the list when these came in. A year later, what do we know? That in actual fact, cheating hasn't increased a lot with these tools. If anything, nothing that hasn't increased at all. But cheating is just endemic anyway. That 77% of high schoolers in a recent survey from Stanford report cheating in the past month or working with another individual. Or getting someone else to write their essays or whatever it is. So it's not really about AI, it's actually much more about engagement. And the engagement level of high school students, that's the real concern, is in public high schools across the US is pretty low, 13%. Now, COVID has made that so much worse than it was, but that's still a very low number. So if the rates of cheating are about the same, even though almost 50% of kids are using AI, what are they actually using it for? And how do they think it should be used? Those are very interesting questions for understanding how these tools are actually impacting learning. Before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about how cheating has been handled and whether these tools actually work, because this is really important for people to understand. This is a study out of a university in Germany that looked at AI detection accuracy. So they found that when these tools are used with human writing, it picks it up 96% of the time it's correct. Now that's not bad, but you don't want to be in that 4% that gets unjustly accused of cheating. And plagiarism particularly, that's a very no one wants that. So that 4% skews with a bias in it. If English is a second language, they get about double the false positive rate. If you put AI into these tools, picks it up as AI generated text about 74% of the time. Not awesome. You adjust it a little bit with some human editing, goes down to 42. You adjust it a bit with some AI editing, and it goes down to 26%, which is just it just doesn't work. Flat out doesn't work. OpenAI actually had a tool that they removed over the summer because of this lack of accuracy. Now, this is kind of a big deal because these tools are still actively being used. People are using these to detect text from AI tools. And there are a number of, there's a considerable cohort of people being accused of cheating when they're not. So that's kind of a big deal. And when asked about how AI should be used in public school, this is what the survey that Sanford did recently said for public schools in the US. When should we be able to use these tools? Generating ideas, sometimes, sort of 60%, never, 19%, always, 23%. Complete or edit a portion of assignment. Complete all of an assignment, pretty low, right? So there's this general sense that when you look at this and say, what does this mean? It means that actually people are pretty open to using AI as a prop, as a support, as a partner, as a tool, but certainly not using it as cheating or laziness or as a shortcut and not actually doing the learning. So for teachers, this is raising, a big sort of existential crisis about what does it mean to learn? What does it mean to test that someone has learned? And those questions have been around for a long time, and every school system has different philosophies and mechanisms for this. In the New Zealanders with the NCEA is really at the extreme of developing proficiency and competency. And we know because we took a child through a transcript process from year 11 in a high school in New Zealand to a senior year in Oregon here. And that was extremely painful for the guidance counselor to try and map everything that she had done to the US system. It also meant that she had a horrible senior year because she ended up having to do about 2 years worth of work in 1 year. But this idea that you can use these as tools to help you learn, and then what does it mean to be assessed? If you've used them to help you learn, can you use them in an assessment? So these are very complex, open questions. But how is it actually being used? This is where the numbers actually sort of start to diverge, and most of the concern is in this lower portion, completing all of an assignment. There's actually a significant chunk of students that are using it for completing all of the assignment. So we're seeing that this sort of shift away from getting a friend to help you, getting someone else to write the essay, to you doing it yourself. Another thing that's really important to understand is that these are starting to be embedded everywhere. So for a start, teachers are using it too. So is it reasonable to ask students not to use AI? This year is going to become the moment that question really sort of the rubber hits the road, if you like, because all of these tools have been embedded in Google Docs and other AI tools and Microsoft Office and what have you. And Google Docs is probably the one where it's going to hit more students than anywhere else. And so teachers are already using it, are going to be using it, and it's going to be embedded in these tools. So having the ability to converse and understand and have a good conversation about the use of these tools, and when by not doing the writing, are you not doing the thinking? That's kind of the overarching. If you're not doing the writing, are you still doing the thinking? So some conversation starters. What do you think about students using tools like ChatGPT to do their homework? Is it cheating? It is cheating? Is it not cheating? Do you know how many of your classmates are doing this? There was one conversation I was part of where one of the students was incredibly upset about the fact that someone had spent basically since ChatGPT had come out hadn't written a single thing and had got an A at the end of the year, and all the students knew it, the teacher didn't, and that made people really quite angry. Have you heard about ChatGPT being used for writing essays? What do you think about what a teacher should do about this? Do you think using AI like ChatGPT to complete assignments gets in the way of your learning? Is there something there that you should be struggling with? how can you use that tool in the right way? Do you think it's fair for teachers to use AI if the students aren't allowed to as well? I want to take you through just a very quick overview of how we think about learning to prompt and learning to ask things of these tools. And we put them in a good, better, best prompting because if you've never done any prompting and you're starting to learn, this is just the best way to think about it, we think. So let's take 3 ways that we like to use these tools. And we think that this is a really functional way to use these tools. And the tools are very good at it. Summarization, it's really handy to have that summary. Why does that support learning? Because sometimes it's easier to start with a summarization of a paper or start with the summarization of a book or an idea or something. Remember, these things have read all the textbooks, they've read all the books, and get a quick high-level summary so that you can engage more with the work. I think it's like, the wet sponge absorbs more, if you like. So summarization is a good way of starting a learning process. Another one is content generation, getting some content going, but not using it as your final output. And conversation, being able to start thinking about how can you get the tools to help you think better about how you might communicate. So good, better, best. And that tends to get more detailed. Not always, but what you're really trying to do with good, better, best prompting and trying to, say, coach a child through this learning process is getting them to think about what they're able to learn at each point. So summarization, provide that high-level summary of key points in the passage. That's okay. That's not a bad prompt. Better is to add in including the overarching narrative, the main arguments, the supporting evidence. Best is to go into that implicit assumptions in your own words. You could add other things with a best prompt. Go back to bias, for example. Summarization, you could say, I'm a bee, summarize how flowers feel to me. And actually, these tools are incredibly good at flipping that perspective around, can help a teen get a much more imaginative perspective on something. So there's a nice way of sort of going deeper into these 3 layers of prompting. Content generation, write a short poem, AABB rhyme scheme. Write a free verse poem reflecting on the memorable experience in nature using vivid imagery and sensory details. The tools go to different places in the model with these different prompts. Best, being able to pull out details like, give me rich metaphors, because metaphors are where kids learn more transfer learning, right? They're able to see it in a different sort of context. We've had really great experiences with one of our teens who was struggling with the concept of electron shells, and he just couldn't get his head around it. And I suggested to him, why don't you get ChatGPT to explain it to you in a way that you're interested in? So he came back about half an hour later and he said, I got ChatGPT to explain electron shells as if I'm a race driver, Formula One driver. And he goes, I get it now. This is a really interesting way of using these tools. We have a particular 7 set of structures that we use, explore, you've seen that, read the entire internet, right? So explore is accessing all digital human knowledge. And segmenting, being able to modularize tasks to make them more achievable. So this is an interesting one because a lot of kids have trouble breaking problems up into steps, or have trouble with time management. So we have one child who we use this prompt with particularly to help her break down something that was due in 2 weeks. And it was like, this is what I have to do. These are how I'm going to be measured, loaded into to ChatGPT. Now, please give me a daily set of tasks so I can hit this deadline and not miss the deadline. Now, that was hugely useful to her because it broke it down into pieces and with one thing to do a day. And as a parent, I didn't have to do that for her or coach her through that process. Hugely valuable. Weaving, lever the combinatorial power. This is an extraordinary capability of these tools. Weaving means that you can take one concept from one area and another concept from another area, like electron shells and Formula One, and put them together in a way that you can see the analogy or the metaphor. You bring a concept from one place to another. Enormously powerful. In pedagogy, it's called transfer learning. It's one of the ways that kids learn the best. One of the ways we all learn the best, because we have models in our mind from one concept that if we apply them somewhere else, we just sort of instantly get it. Creating. These tools allow us to create new things we've never been able to do before. And with a teen, say, got a teen who absolutely loathes coding but has to do it. Now, you can become a coder using these tools. You can build things that you've never been able to do before because they speak code. Python, all sorts of code, they speak it. So being able to, I mean, the skill is knowing when you're out over your skis, but this is a very powerful thing for young people to become more confident in their own creative abilities, because they can do much more than they'd ever be able to do any other way. Building websites, all sorts of things, building prototypes of products. We do this with adults and people are blown away. And this year is going to be the place where this really explodes, because these models are becoming multimodal, which means more than just text. And they're all, text and images put together, sometimes with audio, video, the whole works. Iterate, being able to go back and forth and critique. This is advanced skill, but it's really where I think getting our young people to realize that you can go back and forth and use these things to critique you. The most powerful thing is a question, getting these tools to ask your kids questions so that they can explain it to the tool. They never have to explain it to someone else. A lot of our young people don't like the idea, they don't believe the idea that there's no such thing as a dumb question. They know that there's a dumb question, that we're being judged when we ask a dumb question. So being able to do this with a tool is just so much, it's just such a nice way of sort of reducing anxiety. We're seeing a lot of specific tools go into the market for exactly this thing. A lot of it around emotional support, mental health, and what have you. Fusing, bringing complex information from different places, and reflecting, using these to actually get better at thinking ourselves. So this is how we think about those tools. So we are getting close to time. Where are we now? I'm going to put through just a couple of examples. So, oops.
Sorry about that.
Someone else driving. Multiple varied examples using Explore. Let's have a look at some of these different contexts. Give me 10 examples of how trigonometry is actually used in the real world. And ChatGPT came up with these, because there's always that thing, how would I ever use this in the real world? This is a great way to sort of pull that out and get instant answers. Give me 5 examples of the concept of elasticity of supply and demand. So being able to see, like, just instantly these examples sort of takes away that sense of, oh, maybe I'll never use this. Different perspectives. I love these tools for this. Being able to explain themes from The Catcher in the Rye as a psychologist might read it, or explain themes from Catcher in the Rye through a feminist lens. It was kind of challenging for ChatGPT. Again, explain flowers as if I'm a bee. Those these different, being able to take different perspectives is a really powerful way of using these tools. Perspectives with critique. Imagine you're from the 1950s. Give me 3 different scenarios of the future based on what people predicted back then. Now tell me why they are wrong and why. And I think these are really fun, being able to time travel and take different perspectives. They're just super fun. Mashups and analogies. There we go. Explain electron shells to me as if I'm a race driver. Write a script for the next Hunger Games to explain how a bill is made into a law. These sort of ideas where you can just take something that's otherwise really like hard and maybe you're not very interested in it and put it into something that people are really interested in. You can also adjust the comprehension level up and down and change disciplines. So we use this a lot. I use this all the time. Explain quantum mechanics to me as though I'm a 16-year-old. But I love this one at the bottom. Explain cognitive biases to me as if I'm a Navy SEAL.
You can see how creativity of a team could go absolutely bonkers with these kinds of ideas. And that's good, right? Taps into that creativity and that learning drive and looking at things in totally different ways, but in ways that they never would have been able to before. So there's definitely some, there's risk factors here of what does it mean to still be learning if you're using these tools? But there's also ways to look at this to say that there's new ways to learn in ways that you couldn't have ever done before. And there's ways to tap the personal interest of a learner of all ages in ways that you never could have done before. We both get a kick out of these and learn ways by looking at things from different perspectives. It's a lot of fun.
It's a great place to start with these tools because there's sort of nothing you can go wrong on. Do you want to do some navigation? Because we're going to get close to time.
We are. So let's go ahead.
We have a question.
We do. So let's go ahead and we're going to answer the question first.
Yes, let's do that.
So we do have a question. If anyone else does, please drop it in. We have a question here about using ChatGPT to make your own ChatGPT and the question about copyright issues there. So a couple things to think about. You probably may have heard of GPTs or the GPT store at OpenAI. We'll start off with one bit, which is that OpenAI does not seem to have very much of a practical marketing team at all. And they're naming things in ways that are very difficult for people to track. So if you're having trouble parsing that, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. But what they've done is recently they've allowed you to make your own version of ChatGPT essentially by putting in your own specific information and giving it specific instructions. So for instance, I've made one that's a grammar checker. I put in the style guides from The Economist and AP, and I can then put in text and it'll come back and give me editing suggestions. It'll correct, my punctuation, which is usually pretty terrible.
I loaded in a history textbook for AP history and made a little coach.
And Helen,
good question though, Tam, because I hadn't thought about that.
Helen's loaded in our book. Well, we wrote a book on decision making with data, and so now there's a GPT that you can go and ask questions, and it will tap that book. So making your own GPT is something you can do if you're on the paid plan, and you can
remember that you can only share it with people who also on the paid plan.
Yes, you can share it with. You can use it yourself. You can share with other people who are also on the paid plan. You can also now create teams where you can share it only with the people within your team. There's a couple of things just to understand. One is that these are not secure. It is very easy to extract your instructions. There's a prompt that we've used to extract instructions that a researcher found and wrote a research report about. There is also, it's often easy for people to extract the information that you put in. So if someone was using our version of the GPT that's studying our book, I would assume that someone would be able to extract the PDF of our book that we use to train the GPT. You have to assume that these things are breakable right now. I will come back to you on some of your detailed copyright issue questions because I'm not exactly sure I understand. So I will connect with you afterwards though to answer that question.
Great.
All right.
Well, of course, we've run out of time.
We have.
Because there's so much to talk about here.
So last bit is just to come back to this core question of your excitement to fear ratio, thinking about whether that's changed at all, and to share with you that ours is infinity to infinity. And the reason why we feel that way is we're both extremely excited and also extremely fearful. That there is huge potential for these tools, but there is also huge peril. So thank you so much for joining us. We will call it here to make sure
We'll share what
We
we've
will
got, and there'll be additional prompts to try in there as
we
well.
will share the video. There's more prompts that we did not share in this live stream, but they'll be in the slides so that you can look at them. And please let us know what you thought. Please send us messages with any questions you have. If this is something you'd like us to dig deeper on and talk more about, we'll just hold another webinar and have another conversation. But we'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much. You can reach us at hello@artificiality.world. And thanks so much for being with us.